Most people don't realize this, but the reason living on $2,000 a month feels impossible isn't because people are careless with money. It's because $2,000 simply doesn't stretch the way it used to, even when you do everything right. And that's what we're going to break down today. Not advice yet, not motivation, just reality. Because before you can improve a system, you have to understand how it actually behaves. Let's assume this is someone working full-time, earning roughly $15 an hour after taxes. No luxury lifestyle, no extreme frugality, just a normal attempt at stability. The kind of situation millions of people quietly live in. On paper, $2,000 a month sounds manageable. But once you begin assigning that money to real categories, the picture changes fast. Housing is the first pressure point. Even in modest areas, rent alone can consume nearly half of the entire income. When one category dominates that much of the budget, everything else becomes fragile. Utilities, internet, and basic services don't feel expensive individually, but together they quietly drain what little flexibility remains. Food is next, and this is where the trade-offs begin. Groceries assume planning, restraint, and consistency. Eating out becomes a risk, not a convenience. Transportation follows closely behind, whether that's gas, insurance, public transit, or maintenance. Then there are phones, subscriptions, and the small recurring costs people often forget until they add them up. When all of this is laid out, something uncomfortable becomes clear. There's very little left, sometimes barely anything. Not for savings, not for emergencies, not for the unexpected. And that's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. This isn't a failure of discipline. It's math. When fixed costs consume most of the income, flexibility disappears. This is where the emotional side of money quietly takes over. People start asking themselves where their money went, even though they can trace every dollar. They begin blaming small purchases, when the real issue is the structure itself. The system is tight before any decision is made. And once you're inside that system, every choice carries weight. Imagine standing in a grocery store comparing prices, not because you want to optimize, but because you have to. Fresh produce versus cheaper alternatives. Quality versus quantity. Each item becomes a calculation, not a preference. The same thing happens with health, maintenance, and time. Doctor visits get postponed. Car repairs get delayed. Preventative choices get replaced with short-term survival decisions. Not because people don't understand the long-term cost, but because they don't have the margin to act on it. Over time, this creates a psychological shift. Decisions stop being proactive and become reactive. Instead of planning ahead, people are constantly responding to whatever comes next. This reactive mindset is exhausting, and it slowly erodes confidence. Even a full-time job stops feeling like stability and starts feeling like a balancing act that could collapse at any moment. This is also where a common misconception appears. From the outside, it can look like poor planning or lack of discipline. But from the inside, it feels like constantly choosing between two necessary things and never being able to choose both. That tension is what makes $2,000 a month feel impossible. Not the numbers alone, but the absence of breathing room between them. This is why traditional budgeting advice often fails at this income level. It assumes there's room to optimize. It assumes there's slack in the system. But when everything is already stretched thin, optimization turns into exhaustion. You can't discipline your way out of a structural constraint. And this is where something important shifts. Financial pressure isn't just personal, it's shared. Many people are navigating the same constraints quietly, believing they're alone in it. But when these experiences are talked about openly, something changes. Shame starts to dissolve. Understanding replaces judgment. In supportive environments, people begin sharing what actually helps. Not perfect solutions, but practical ones. Bulk purchasing together. Meal prepping as a group. Exchanging information about local resources, overlooked benefits, or smarter ways to manage recurring costs. The relief doesn't come from suddenly having more money, but from realizing the burden doesn't have to be carried alone. As these connections grow, people become more confident navigating their finances. They learn faster. They avoid mistakes others have already made. They gain perspective. And just as importantly, they regain a sense of dignity. Struggling stops feeling like a personal failure and starts feeling like a shared challenge shaped by larger forces. This sense of community changes the emotional landscape of money. Anxiety softens into awareness. Isolation turns into accountability. Small wins become visible and meaningful. Sticking to a plan for a week. Finding one category that hurts a little less. Those moments matter because they restore a sense of control. Living on $2,000 a month often forces people into survival mode. But survival doesn't have to mean silence. When stories are shared, new systems begin to form. Not perfect ones, and not instant fixes, but better structures built on understanding rather than blame. Financial health stops being just about numbers and starts becoming about resilience, access, and support. And that leads to the real question. If $2,000 a month already demands this level of precision and trade-off, what happens when something goes wrong? A medical bill, a car breakdown, a job disruption. The margin isn't there. And that's why this conversation matters. Not to shame, not to scare, but to understand the reality we're operating in. So if you were living on $2,000 a month, doing everything right, making all the responsible choices and still feeling stuck, would you assume the problem is you? Or would you start questioning the system you're trying to survive inside of? Let me know in the comments.